In the heart of Ufil village, there was a river called Nwanta, known for its clear waters and strange whispers at night. The elders often warned young men not to go near the river when the moon was high, for it was said that a spirit dwelled there. But as time passed, many dismissed these warnings as mere stories to scare children. The danger, however, was real. Hidden beneath the waters was Olama, a woman of breathtaking beauty, but with a heart as dark as the deepest ocean. She was no ordinary woman. She was a marine spirit, a being of great power who walked among humans but belonged to the world beneath the waters. Olama's beauty was unmatched. Her skin glowed like the morning sun, her eyes sparkled like the stars, and her voice was like the sweet melody of a flute. Men who set their eyes on her could not resist her charm. She carried herself with an air of mystery, her long flowing hair swaying with the wind as though it had a life of its own. But those who looked too long into her eyes would find themselves lost in a deep trance, unable to break free. She was on a mission, one that had been given to her by the spirits of the deep. Her task was simple: to lure men into her web of desire and steal their destinies. The elders of Ufil knew that something strange was happening, but they could not point fingers. Young men who once had bright futures suddenly became weak, lost and hopeless. Some who had promising businesses lost everything overnight. Others who had been the pride of their families became beggars roaming the streets. It was as if an unseen force had drained their destinies. Little did they know that the cause of their downfall was the same woman whose beauty they admired, Olama, the enchantress of the deep. Chaik was the pride of Ufil village. He was young, intelligent, and full of promise. Many elders believed he would become a great leader one day. He was the first in his family to attend the big school in the neighboring town, and his teachers always praised him for his brilliance. His father, a humble farmer, often said, "Chaik will bring honor to our family. His hands will touch gold, and his name will open doors." Indeed, everything was working in Chaik's favor, until he met Olama. It was on a cool evening when Chaik first saw her. He had gone to fetch water from the village, when a soft, sweet voice called his name. He turned and saw a woman standing near the Nwanta River. She was breathtaking, her beauty beyond anything he had ever seen. Her eyes were deep pools of mystery, her lips full and inviting, and her dress clung to her like mist on the morning grass. Chaik felt his heart race. He knew he should look away, but something about her held him captive. Olama smiled and walked toward him, her every movement graceful like a gentle wave. "I have heard of you, Chaik," she whispered, her voice as smooth as fresh palm wine. "The village speaks of your wisdom, your strength, your future." Chaik swallowed hard, confused about how she knew him. But before he could ask, she reached out and touched his hand. A strange warmth spread through his body. His mind screamed for him to run, but his legs would not move. That night, Chaik did not return home. He followed Olama deep into the forest, where she whispered secrets in his ears, promising him a future greater than he could ever imagine. She told him he was destined for greatness, but to unlock it, he needed to give himself fully to her. Chaik, overcome by desire, did not hesitate. He surrendered himself to Olama, not knowing that with each touch, each kiss, each embrace, his destiny was being drained away. By the time Chaik woke up the next morning, something had changed. He felt weak, his mind clouded. The dreams of his future that once burned brightly within him now felt distant, like a fading shadow. He struggled to remember what had happened the night before, but the memories slipped through his fingers like water. Days turned into weeks, and Chaik, once the village's pride, became a shadow of himself. He lost interest in his studies, his once sharp mind now dull and confused. His father wept as he watched his son, once full of life, now wandering the village like a lost soul. The elders called for a meeting, but no one could explain what had happened to Chaik. Some said he had fallen under a curse. Others whispered that he had offended the gods. But only one person knew the truth, Olama, the woman who had stolen his destiny. And she was not done yet. Obinna was not just rich. He was one of the most successful young traders in the entire region. He owned vast farmlands, several palm oil businesses, and a fleet of canoes that transported goods to faraway markets. He was respected by both the young and old, and many fathers prayed for a son like him. Obinna was also generous, always helping the poor and supporting community projects. But for all his wealth and influence, he had one weakness: women. He had heard whispers of a strange woman who had appeared in Ufeel, a woman whose beauty was beyond human comprehension. His friends spoke about her in hushed tones, warning him to stay away, but Obinna was intrigued. A woman so beautiful that men forget themselves? I must see her for myself, he said with a laugh. He was convinced that no woman, no matter how enchanting, could ever control him. One evening, as Obinna was returning from the market, he saw her. She was standing under the old baobab tree, her long hair flowing in the wind, her eyes glowing softly under the moonlight. She smiled when she saw him and beckoned him forward with a single finger. Obinna felt a strange pull in his chest. He had never seen her before, yet it felt as though he had known her all his life. "You are Obinna, the great trader," she said, her voice smooth like honey. "I have waited for you." Obinna chuckled, his confidence rising. "Oh, and what do you want with me, beautiful one?" he asked. Olama took a step closer, her scent wrapping around him like an invisible rope. "I have seen your wealth, your power, but I see something more in you. Something greater, something even you do not know yet." Her fingers traced the lines on his palm, and suddenly, Obinna felt his heart pounding. That night, Obinna did not return home. He followed Olama into the shadows, where she took from him what he did not know he was giving. With every touch, every whisper, she drained his fortune, taking away the favor that had made him successful. When he woke up the next morning, his world had changed. At first, he did not notice, but slowly disaster struck. His goods got lost in a terrible storm. His best workers abandoned him. His farms, once fertile, dried up without explanation. Within months, Obinna was broke. The same man who had once been the richest in the village now begged for food. His name, once spoken with admiration, was now only a whisper of pity. Obinna could not understand what had happened. He went from one herbalist to another, from one priest to the next, seeking answers. But there was no cure for what had been done to him. His fate was sealed. Olama had taken his destiny, and there was no way to get it back. Ikeen was known throughout Ufeel and beyond as a fearless warrior. He had fought many battles and returned victorious each time. His strength was legendary, and his name alone was enough to send enemies fleeing. The king had already chosen him to lead the village warriors, and many believed he would one day become the war chief. But despite his strength, Ikeen had a weakness: pride and the desire for pleasure. One fateful night, after a great festival in Ufeel, Ikeen and his fellow warriors gathered to celebrate their latest victory. There was laughter, music, and a flow of palm wine. As the night grew deeper, a stranger appeared in their midst. She was wrapped in a red cloth, her hair long and dark like the night sky. Her eyes sparkled in the dim light of the fire, and her lips curved into a knowing smile. It was Olama. Every man turned to stare, but it was Ikeen she was looking at. He felt something stir inside him, a strange heat rising in his chest. He had never seen this woman before, but it was as if she had come just for him. "Great warrior," she whispered, stepping closer. "Do you not wish for something more than war? Do you not desire something sweeter?" Ikeen laughed, raising his cup. "And what sweetness do you offer, beautiful one?" he asked, his voice filled with confidence. Olama leaned in, her breath warm against his ear. "Come with me, and you shall taste it." The other warriors cheered, some warning him jokingly, others encouraging him. But Ikeen, blinded by his own arrogance, stood up and took her hand. That was the moment his fate was sealed. She led him away from the camp, deep into the forest, where the trees whispered secrets and the air grew thick with mystery. There, under the gaze of the moon, Olama claimed him. She took from him what no sword or spear had ever been able to: his strength. The next morning, Ikeen awoke feeling different. His muscles, once as hard as stone, felt weak. His mind, once sharp as a blade, was clouded. At first, he thought it was just exhaustion from the festival, but when he tried to lift his spear, it fell from his hands like a stick. Days turned into weeks, and Ikeen, the mighty warrior, could no longer fight. In battles, he stumbled instead of striking. The warriors who once followed his commands now whispered behind his back. The king, seeing his decline, removed him from his position. The people of Ufeel, once proud of him, now saw him as a failure. Olama had stolen his strength, and with it, his destiny. Of all the young men in Ufeel, Ifani was the most spiritually gifted. From a young age, the village priests had seen something special in him. They said he was chosen by the gods, a man destined to become the greatest high priest in the land. His words carried power, his prayers were answered, and his presence brought peace. The people of Ufeel trusted him, and many came to him for guidance. But even a man of the gods is still a man. And Ifani, despite his wisdom, had one flaw: curiosity. He had heard of the strange woman in the village, the one whose beauty was beyond mortal understanding. He had seen the fall of Chaik, Obina, and Ikeen, and he knew something was wrong. But instead of keeping his distance, he made a terrible mistake. He wanted to see her for himself. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Ifani walked alone toward the river. He told himself he was only going to observe, to understand what force had taken hold of his brothers. But when he reached the water's edge, he found her waiting, Olama. She was standing in the shallow water, her reflection dancing in the ripples. She turned to him and smiled. "I've been expecting you, Ifani," she said softly. Ifani felt his heart pound. He gripped the staff in his hand, trying to remind himself of who he was. "I know what you are," he said. "I know what you have done." Olama only laughed. "Do you?" she whispered. "Then tell me, wise one, why are you here?" Ifani opened his mouth to speak, but the words would not come. The moment he met her gaze, he felt something shift inside him. It was like falling into a deep ocean, his mind drowning in her beauty. He had come to resist, but he could feel himself slipping. "Come," she whispered, stepping toward him. "Come, Ifani." And he did. That night, Ifani, the man chosen by the gods, surrendered himself to Olama. And just like the others, he did not realize what he had lost until it was too late. The next morning, when he tried to pray, the heavens were silent. When he tried to bless the people, his words carried no power. The connection he had once felt with the gods was gone. Olama had taken it, and with that, the fourth and final destiny was stolen. The village of Ufeel had changed. 4 of its greatest sons, Chaik, Obina, Ikeen, and Ifani, had fallen, each one a shadow of the man he used to be. People whispered in fear, wondering what evil had come upon them. Mothers held their sons close, warning them against strange women. Fathers gathered in hushed meetings, their faces lined with worry. The once vibrant community was now filled with sorrow, and the elders knew something had to be done. Chief Nwokik, the oldest and wisest man in the village, called for a council meeting. The priests, warriors, and noblemen all gathered under the great Irako tree. "Something unnatural is happening," the chief said, his voice heavy with concern. 4 strong men, all from different backgrounds, have lost their destinies. "This is not ordinary." The head priest nodded. "I have consulted the gods. They have shown me visions of a woman cloaked in darkness, a woman who takes but never gives." A deep silence followed. Then, an elder cleared his throat. "We all know the common link," he said gravely. "They all encountered the same woman, Olama." The name sent chills through the gathering. They had heard the rumors. They had seen the way men looked at her, as if bewitched. But now, the truth was undeniable. Olama was not an ordinary woman. She was a spirit, a force of darkness sent to steal the destinies of men. Chief Nwokik took a deep breath. "We must act before she claims another victim." The elders devised a plan. They knew Olama only went after the strongest, the brightest, the most promising. So they chose a man to bait her, Ikena, the village's new rising star. Ikenna was young, bold, and full of potential. He was known for his strength and wisdom, a combination that made him a perfect target. But unlike the others, he was prepared. The elders gave him charms for protection, the priests bathed him in sacred waters, and the warriors taught him how to resist her enchantment. One evening, Ikenna sat by the river, pretending to be lost in thought. It didn't take long before she appeared. Olama. She emerged from the shadows, her beauty more dazzling than ever. Her eyes glowed softly, her lips curved into a smile. "You are different," she whispered, stepping closer. "Stronger. But even the strongest man must fall." Ikenna swallowed hard, fighting the pull of her voice. He reminded himself of the 4 men who had fallen before him. He gripped the sacred charm in his pocket and stood his ground. "Who are you, Olama?" he asked, his voice steady. "Why do you take from men?" Olama laughed, a sound both sweet and deadly. "I take what is given freely," she said. "Men desire me, they give themselves to me, and I simply collect." But before she could move closer, the elders and priests emerged from their hiding places, chanting powerful incantations. The ground trembled, the air grew thick with power, and for the first time, fear flickered in Olama's eyes. She tried to run, but the warriors blocked her path. The priests raised their staffs, calling upon the gods to reveal her true form. In a flash of blinding light, Olama's disguise fell away. What stood before them was no longer a breathtaking woman, but a creature of the deep, a marine spirit, her skin shimmering like water, her eyes burning with fury. She let out an ear-piercing scream, but the elders did not waver. They sealed her fate with ancient words of power, binding her to the waters forever. As soon as Olama was cast into the river, a great wind swept through the village. The air felt lighter. The darkness that had hovered over Ufeel began to lift. And then, something miraculous happened. Chaik, Obina, Ikin, and Ifani all collapsed at the same time. For hours, they remained unconscious as the priests worked tirelessly, performing sacred rites to cleanse them of Olama's influence. When they finally woke up, their eyes were clear, their minds sharp once again. But something was different. They remembered everything. Chaik wept, realizing how foolish he had been to ignore the warnings. Obina trembled at the thought of how easily his pride had led him astray. Ikin clenched his fists, ashamed that he had let pleasure strip him of his strength. Ifani fell to his knees, his heart heavy with the knowledge that he had nearly lost his divine calling. They had been given a second chance, but at a great cost. The village rejoiced, but the elders made sure the lesson was never forgotten. A great gathering was held, where Chief Nwokik addressed the people. "Let this be a warning to all men," he said. "Destiny is a gift, but it can be lost in a moment of weakness." The people listened in silence as Chaik, Obina, Ikin, and Ifani shared their stories. They spoke of how desire had blinded them, how pleasure had deceived them, and how the price was almost too great to bear. From that day forward, the men of Ufeel became wiser. They no longer chased after beauty without caution. They no longer gave in to desires that clouded their judgment. And most importantly, they learned that not every woman is what she seems. The priests built a shrine near the river, a place of warning and remembrance. And whenever young men grew too reckless, the elders would take them there and say, "Remember Olama. Remember the destinies that were almost lost." As for Olama, she remained trapped in the waters, forever bound to the river that had once given her power. On certain nights, when the moon was high, fishermen swore they could hear her voice, calling softly from the depths. "Come to me," she would whisper. "Come, and I will show you pleasures beyond your wildest dreams." But no man in Ufeel ever answered her call again. Her story spread beyond the village, a cautionary tale for all men. Beware of the enchantress, for not all beauty brings blessings. Some beauty is a curse. And so, the legend of Olama, the enchantress of the deep, the woman who stole 4 destinies, lived on. A tale of warning, a lesson never to be forgotten.